Mourning in a feudal lord's residence didn't truly begin with the sun. It began with whoever was in charge of making sure everyone else appeared effortlessly perfect. Usually servants, because of course it was fora concubine mekei. As the term was often used, the first moments of the day were already wrapped in expectations. She didn't wake up lazily, stretch her arms, and groan about needing more sleep like the rest of us. Instead, she would rise carefully, quietly. And with that sort of posture you develop only after your entire social worth has been linked to gracefulness. Her chambers weren't vast, they were elegant, certainly, but not ostentatious. Tatami mats, with that faint grassy scent, sliding shiji panels, letting in the earliest hints of pale gold light, and somewhere nearby, a garden the Lord probably considered a metaphor for his own soul. They often did. A concubine's day started with grooming, because her appearance wasn't just about beauty. It was evidence of discipline, obedience, and her ability to uphold the household's reputation. Hair had to be brushed until it gleamed like polished lacquer, skin powdered lightly, brows shaped with gentle precision, teeth, well, depending on the era, there was ohaguro, blackening them with a dye mixture, a practice that seems alarming to modern eyes. But in their context, black teeth were a marker of maturity, refinement, and marriageability. Like many beauty standards, it made perfect sense to them and zero sense to us. And as she prepared, she would already be thinking about etiquette, because etiquette wasn't part of the job. It was the job. The bowing, the posture, the tone of voice, these weren't personal choices. They were memorized choreography, rehearsed daily, designed to keep harmony in a place where harmony was extremely fragile and extremely mandatory. Let's drift a little further. Breakfast, eating light, thinking heavy concubines rarely ate much in the morning. Not because of fashion trends, though you will all be pleased to know Danti eat too much, so you stay dainty. It's absolutely not a modern invention, but also because meals were structured around the Lord's needs, the household hierarchy, and whatever political mood was circulating that week. So breakfast was simple. Rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables, maybe some grilled fish if it was a generous day. She would eat quietly, often with other women in the residence, but always bound by rank. Concubines belonged to a strange middle tier, not noble wives, but not mere servants, more like living political accessories. Treasured, but replaceable, important, but not secure. Conversations were soft and usually safe, very safe, because gossip traveled like wildfire inside these estates, and saying the wrong thing could land a woman in anything from mild disfavor to full-on exile to a remote residence where the main decoration was boredom. So breakfast wasn't just food, it was social navigation, and she learned quickly that silence was often the most nutritious option. Mid-morning, training, refinement, and endless upkeep. Now we drift into the hut of the morning, the part everyone imagines when they picture concubines. The graceful arts. Concubines weren't chosen for beauty alone. They were expected to embody the height of cultural refinement. So after breakfast, many spent hours practicing skills that demonstrated elegized calligraphy, because nothing said refinement like perfect brush strokes. Koto or shamisen playing, to provide a soundtrack to the Lord's afternoons. Poetry, which was basically the social media of the era, short, clever, and always open to misinterpretation. Dance, the slow, deliberate movements that reflected emotional subtlety, or at least looked pretty while doing so. You can imagine it as a kind of never-ending audition. The goal wasn't to win, it was to avoid giving anyone a reason to think you were slipping. Because a concubine's position, while privileged, was also precarious. She was surrounded by other women who were also competing for visibility, influence, or just basic survival. It wasn't necessarily the dramatic, hair-pulling rivalry you see in television dramas. Far more often it was quiet resentment, soft smiles with sharp edges, and polite comments designed to make you question your entire existence. And through all of this, the concubine practiced, perfected her arts, and presented herself as flawlessly calm, even if her wrist hurt from holding a koto posture for hours. Even if she was sick. Even if she hadn't slept enough, because the Lord visited at an inconveniently late hour. Let's drift to midday. Lunch. A momentary pause in a very long day. Lunch was slightly more relaxed. Slightly the food was still something simmered, something pickled, and while this part of the day allowed for a bit more breathing room, it was also when the household's supervisors, the senior women, the official wife, the attendants circulated most actively. Concubines had to be visible, but not too visible. Polite, but not overly bright or bold. Friendly, but not competitive. Gracious, but not sycophantic. It was a balancing act that made walking a tightrope look like a casual stroll. Sometimes, if she was lucky, she might exchange letters or small bits of gossip with attendants she trusted, or she might glance into the garden and catch a moment of peace from the sight of koi drifting in a pond. Those tiny intervals of quiet were soft. Private mers. Let's move to the afternoon. Afternoon. Duties. Rituals. And the politics of presence. Afternoons varied enormously, depending on the Lord's preferences, the household's needs, and the ongoing political climate. But for concubines, the afternoon was often about being available. Not necessarily for intimacy though, that could happen. More often for companionship, conversation, or simply existing nearby in a decorative and well-trained way. A concubine might prepare tea, reading poetry aloud in an even, soothing voice. She might play music in the background while the Lord read reports or wrote letters. Sometimes she would sit with him, not speaking, just sharing the quiet. Other times, the Lord wouldn't appear at all, and the concubine would instead attend to household rituals, seasonal ceremonies, offerings, clothing inventories, supervising younger attendants all. The administrivia that kept elite life running smoothly, but rarely gets mentioned in romanticized portrayals. And behind all of that, the underlying political reality. A concubine's primary value uncomfortable, as it is often revolved around the possibility of producing heirs. So part of the afternoon was always tinged with unspoken expectations. Health was monitored. Behavior was observed. Nothing dramatic, but always present. It was a gentle kind of pressure. Soft, constant, like a silk thread tugging at the back of the mind. Let's drift toward evening. Lantern light and delicate expectations. As evening fell, the estate quieted in a way that feels almost cinematic. Lanterns glowing, shadows lengthening, and the distant sounds of night insects weaving a sort of tapestry behind every conversation. This was often the time when the concubine prepared again, freshened her appearance, adjusted her kimono, reapplied powder, and made sure she looked serene, even if her feet were aching. Whether or not she would be summoned depended on many factors: the Lord's mood, the politics of the household, the standing of the official wife, and the thousand tiny things that could tilt the balance. If she was summoned, the night involved companionship, conversation, and perhaps intimacy. If not, she returned to her chambers, maybe practiced calligraphy under lamplight, or whispered with or simply sat quietly, letting the day settle in her bones. It was not a romantic life. It was structured, elegant, and suffocating in subtle ways. Let's end the day. Night, the stillness, and the quiet thoughts. Night in a feudal estate was deeply silent. Thick, almost a silence that left room for thoughts to circle. A concubine's final moments before sleep were often the only ones truly her own. She might think about her family, whom she likely hadn't seen in months or years. She might reflect on her standing, her future, her hopes for stability. Or she might try not to think at all. Just breathe, and let tomorrow come when it comes. And so the day ends softly, neatly, wrapped in ritual and the faint scent of incense. So now that we've drifted through a concubine's daily rhythm, let's quietly widen the lens, because her life wasn't lived in a vacuum. It was lived inside an entire ecosystem of hierarchy, whispers, and very delicate power balances, all wrapped in silk. Think of the residence the Yoshiki as a living organism. Every hallway had its own temperature of tension. Every room had its own politics. The breeze itself probably gossiped. And at the center of this ecosystem, not the concubine, the official wife, the legal anchor of the family, the sun around which the rest of the women were expected to orbit without making too much gravitational fuss. Let's drift into that world. Hierarchy, the invisible architecture of her life. Concubines sat in a strange middle zone. They weren't servants, but they also weren't wives. They were something like honor dependents, valuable enough to dress beautifully, but not valuable enough to have opinions. To help us visualize this, imagine a ladder you're not allowed to climb, but you're also not allowed to step off of. At the top of the women's hierarchy sat the official wife, lawful, respectable, unshakably permanent. Senior ladies or secondary wives, depending on the era and the Lord's ambitions. Concubines, the beautifully decorated question marks of the household. Ladies in waiting, attendants, and everyone else who made sure things functioned. Concubines had status, but it was conditional, fragile, like an old teacup. Everyone keeps admiring, but also insists on using. They could be elevated if they bore sons, demoted if they caused offense, ignored if the Lord lost interest, or quietly sidelined if the official wife felt threatened. It was like living in a social minefield covered with tatami mats. Rivalries, soft voices, sharp politics, Now, popular dramas tend to make concubines look like they spent every waking moment plotting revenge or poisoning each other's steed. The reality was much quieter. Think, less dramatic screaming, more strategic smiling. A concubine might be envied for her looks, resented for her influence, or judged for her education level. But most conflicts took the form of leaving someone out of an invitation, very politely arranging for certain gossip to accidentally circulate, adjusting seating arrangements in ways only insiders noticed. It was subtle psychological warfare, fought with hairpins, bowing angles, and the timing of tea. But occasionally, very occasionally, a concubine could gain quiet, genuine influence, not by force, but by longevity, consistency, and the ability to be calm while everyone else mentally set each other on fire. Let's drift further into a subject most people love to whisper about: beauty, a blessing, a weapon, a burden. Beauty, in feudal Japan, wasn't just appearance, it was currency. And like any currency, it came with strings attached. The ideal beauty varied by era, but a few traits were consistently admired: glossy black hair, styled elegantly pale skin, achieved through powders that would make dermatologists weep, delicate features, graceful movements, a quiet voice, ohagro blackened teeth in certain periods, and above all, restraint. Beauty wasn't meant to be vivid or bold, it was meant to be controlled. The irony: beautiful women were surrounded by luxury, but they rarely owned anything, not even their time. Personality, having one. Cautiously, a concubine couldn't be too witty, too outspoken, too assertive, too emotional, too visible, or too invisible. She lived inside a narrow emotional corridor. If she was too lively, she risked seeming improper. If she was too quiet, she risked fading out of relevance. It was a performance that lasted all day, every day. Even her laughter was expected to be gentle, soft, almost apologetic. Imagine having to think about whether your chuckle was politically appropriate. That's the level of social gymnastics we're dealing with. Let's drift deeper into the environment that shaped her world. The household, a maze of duty and control. The Lord's residence was designed for order. Everything had a place. Everyone had a role. The architecture itself reinforced hierarchy. Long corridors that forced single-file walk-in. Sliding doors that allowed people to overhear everything whether they meant to or not. Separate quarters to keep women apart, or together, depending on what made the politics smoother. Privacy was scarce. Secrets were plentiful, and everyone developed excellent hearing. Even the gardens weren't just gardens. They were statements, proof of refinement, culture, and wealth crafted to reflect the Lord's taste. Wandering them was peaceful, but you never forgot someone knew exactly where you were at every moment. Let's drift now towards something subtler, something inward. Loneliness, the companion nobody talked about, despite the company of dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. Concubines often lived quietly, lonely lives. Family visits were rare. Travel was restricted. Letters were read by supervisors. Friendships came with risks. And real affection was not guaranteed. A concubine might spend years sleeping just meters away from dozens of other women, yet still feel entirely alone. The stillness of night made that feeling heavier. The thin walls didn't silence anything, and every whisper reminded her of what she couldn't say. Let's drift now into one of the biggest reasons concubines existed at all: children. The delicate politics of birth. A concubine's position could transform entirely based on whether she had children, especially sons. If she bore a son, her status usually rose. If she bore a daughter, respect increased, but stability didn't. If she bore no children, well, her future became a question mark. But here's the important part. Motherhood didn't necessarily mean motherhood in the modern sense. Often children, especially sons, were raised by high-ranking women, including the official wife. This wasn't cruelty, it was political infrastructure. A concubine might give birth, recover, and then watch her child be taken away for formal upbringing. She might see the child often, or hardly at all. It depended on many variables, none of which she controlled. The emotional toll of this system was rarely recorded, but it doesn't take much imagination to understand the weight. Let's drift to something much quieter, a soft, almost overlooked. Moments of peace, small, precious, and fleeting. Even in rigid environments, people find moments of peace. For concubines, peace came in small, personal forms. The sound of rain on the wooden eaves, a private cup of tea when no one was watching, practicing calligraphy late at night, each stroke a deep breath, watching koi drift in the pond, listening to the gentle clack of bamboo waterspouts, folding and refolding silk, not because she had to, but because it felt calming. The scent of incense, As the day wound down, these were small things. But small things can hold a lot of meaning, and they helped keep her grounded in a world where almost nothing belonged to her. Let's drift now toward the edges of her power. Influence, real, but very quiet, despite restrictions. Concubines weren't powerless. Some became trusted, some learned how to listen, observe, and gently influence decisions. Some subtly shaped household dynamics, and very few achieved enough stability to protect younger women, advocate for attendance, or soften the household's harsher policies. Power wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It trickled in slow, deliberate gestures. A well-timed suggestion, a calm presence when others panicked. A small favor granted to someone who needed it. A discreet word in the right ear. The influence of a concubine wasn't about dominance. It was about endurance. Let's drift toward evening now, toward the feeling of an entire world lived behind sliding doors. So far, we've wandered through the rhythms of a concubine's daily life. But that life didn't begin the moment she entered a lord's residence. There was a whole journey before that one, shaped by family expectations, social pressures, and the kind of political calculations that really shouldn't involve teenagers, but absolutely did. Let's step backward in time and drift through how a girl actually became a concubine. Spoiler, it wasn't usually her idea, and it was rarely as glamorous as poets later made it sound. Family background? The quiet bargain: most concubines didn't come from poverty. They came from middle-ranking samurai families, minor nobles, or households with just enough status to matter but not enough to control their own fate. Their families weren't trying to sell them. They were trying to secure connections. Placing a daughter in the household of a powerful lord was a strategic move. It could bring future favors, better marriage arrangements for siblings, or, at the very least, protection. To the families, it was a reasonable exchange. To the girl, it was a life-changing career she didn't exactly interview for. Of course, there were exceptions. Some girls did come from humbler origins. A few were handpicked for unusual talent or beauty. But the guiding rule was simple. A concubine was a gift from one family to another, a living symbol of loyalty, wrapped neatly in silk. Let's float a little deeper into her early training. Childhood preparation. Grooming a future lady of polite silence. Families that hoped their daughters might enter elite households began preparing them early. Not in a congratulations, you're destined for a life of quiet political tension kind of way. More in the sense that girls were taught skills that made them attractive candidates. Reading and writing, preferably with a gentle hand. Classical poetry. Because nothing says refinement like quoting something from centuries earlier. Sewing and embroidery. The art of turning fabric into proof of virtue. Music. Often the koto or flute tea etiquette. A surprisingly advanced discipline for people barely old enough to hold a teacup posture, which mattered more than personality. Modesty, which mattered more than happiness. These lessons weren't abusive or dramatic. They were simply expectations. Soft, relentless expectations shaping a girl into someone who could survive gracefully in a world of sliding doors and watchful eyes. Let's drift forward to the moment everything changed. Selection, not exactly a fairy tale invitation. The selection process varied, depending on the region and the era, but it usually involved a family recommendation, a lord's advisor or attendant, inspecting the candidate, a formal request being made, a period of preparation and farewell. It wasn't like the movies, where someone holds up a portrait and declares, "Yes, she'll do." It was more administrative, less romantic, more paperwork. The advisors weren't looking only for beauty. They were checking. Can she conduct herself quietly? Does she know etiquette? Will she embarrass the household? Does she look like someone who won't start arguments? Can she produce heirs? In theory? Will the official wife tolerate her existence without causing a diplomatic incident? So yes, it was quite the interview process. Let's float onward. Saying goodbye. Leaving home for a future that wasn't hers. The departure was ceremonial. Not dramatic, but structured. A girl would pack her few belongings, a mix of clothing, writing tools, maybe a charm from a family shrine. Servants would prepare the wagons or palanquin. Her mother might quietly cry. Her father would remain stoic, because that was his job. Siblings would watch from a careful distance. And she would leave, often forever. Most concubines didn't return home once they entered service, unless something had gone terribly wrong or terribly right. Let's drift gently into her arrival. The soft shock of a new world entering a lord's residence felt a bit like entering a palace and a political pressure cooker all at once. The first impression was quiet. The second was order. The third was disorientation. Nothing made sense. Yet, and everyone moved like they had choreographed it beforehand. She would be greeted by senior attendance women, whose entire personalities seemed to be built on precisely correct bowing angles. They would explain the rules, so many rules. Things like how to address higher-ranking ladies, how to walk without disturbing the tatami, how to hold her hands, which corridors she was allowed to use, which doors were absolutely forbidden, what to do if the Lord spoke to her, what to do if the Lord didn't, how to keep secrets even from yourself, and most important, never draw unnecessary attention. Not for mistakes, and definitely not for successes. She had entered a space where harmony was compulsory, enthusiasm less so. Let's drift into the next stage, the adjustments. Training. The art of becoming a decorative diplomat. Life as a new concubine wasn't glamorous. It was more like attending the strictest finishing school imaginable. Her days were filled with lessons in etiquette, practice sessions, in music and calligraphy, dress training, so she could manage layers of kimono without tripping, studying court speech, which was a different dialect entirely. Memorizing rituals. She wasn't expected to be brilliant, just correct. Perfectly correct. Her supervisors, senior women who had mastered the art of polite intimidation, watched everything. A misplaced bow could earn a stern talk, a loud footstep, a tense expression, a poorly folded garment. All noted. Not punished dramatically, just corrected again and again, until calmness became second nature. Let's drift into the emotional side of this transition. Homesickness. The quiet ache nobody discussed. Most new concubines were teenagers. They were old enough to follow protocol, but young enough to miss home deeply. But crying openly was discouraged. Actually, crying silently was also discouraged. Even the appearance of sadness was considered disruptive, so homesickness became a private ritual. Writing letters she knew she shouldn't send, whispering to herself at night, holding on to small tokens from home. Counting days without purpose, breathing slowly when anxiety rose, finding comfort in routine. These quiet struggles didn't show up in official records, but they were absolutely part of the life. Let's drift to one more aspect of this arrival, one that defined her future more than anything else. The Lord, meeting the man who controlled her entire fate. Eventually, the concubine would meet the Lord. Not necessarily intimately, not at first, but formally. And this moment determined everything. Not dramatically, like lightning striking. More like a door quietly opening. Or quietly not. A Lord might be kind, aloof, polite, indifferent, insecure, dramatic, scholarly, completely uninterested. Or, occasionally, genuinely gentle. Most were simply busy. They had political responsibilities, land disputes, endless correspondence, and the looming pressure of clan expectations. Concubines were part of the household structure, not the center of it. She might bow, exchange a few soft words, and then return to her chambers, unsure of what it all meant. It was the beginning, not an event. A slow unfolding, not a narrative twist. Let's drift to how she adjusted quietly, gradually, and with more resilience than history usually credits her for. We've already walked through the concubine's daily rituals, her training, her recruitment, and the shape of the household around her. But now, let's slip into the space no record fully captures, the inner life. The part she couldn't talk about, the thoughts she carried like soft, invisible baggage. This is where the story becomes more human and more tender, and maybe a little sad though, in that calm, distant, almost poetic way that feels safe at night. Let's begin with the emotion. Everyone assumes concubines bathed in daily jealousy. The emotion everyone expected, and nobody admitted jealousy existed, of course, but not in the dramatic, hair-raising, shouting across balconies way television loves. It was quieter, more contained, a low, steady simmer that etiquette tried very hard to keep under the lid. Imagine knowing you were chosen, but not uniquely. You mattered, but not personally. You were valued, but not irreplaceable. And then imagine seeing other women who shared your position, women with different strengths, different connections, different chances. Jealousy wasn't non-eruption. It was a nache soft tension in the ribs, a feeling you politely ignored until it politely faded. And the most infuriating part, sometimes you weren't jealous of another concubine at all. Sometimes you were jealous of freedom. Let's drift deeper. Isolation. A life lived among people, yet alone. A concubine was never physically alone. The household was always bustling. Attendants passing, women whispering, guards strolling, servants gliding by with trays, advisors pacing in distant rooms. But emotional solitude that came free of charge. Her family was far away. Letters were monitored. News came sporadically. Daily interactions were formal. Friendships carried risk. Even conversations with other concubines were measured, filtered through layers of rank and etiquette. So she learned to live with her thoughts as her closest companions. She learned to observe instead of speak. She learned silence deep, practiced silence. Let's drift to the people who shared her world. Friendships, the quiet alliances that kept her sane despite everything. Friendships did form. Human beings are stubborn like that. Sometimes it was with another concubine, sometimes a lady in waiting, sometimes a maid with a gentle smile, sometimes an older woman who had seen too much and decided to pass down survival tips like secret heirlooms. These friendships were soft, subtle, and mostly private. They happened in moments like walking in the garden while pretending not to be together, whispering over folding screens, sharing hairpins by accident, laughing quietly when a cat wandered into the halls and disrupted the very serious atmosphere, comforting each other after a difficult day, exchanging poems with meanings. Only they understood these weren't friendships that they were friendships that nodded. Let's drift into another emotion, one that could become either a burden or a strength. Fear, soft, present, and never spoken aloud. Fear wasn't constant, but it lingered at the edge. Fear of losing favor, making a mistake, being misunderstood, offending someone higher ranking, being replaced, being forgotten, failing, family expectations, getting sick in a time when medicine was optimistic at best. Fear didn't control her daily actions. Etiquette handled that. But it whispered now and then, late at night, early in the morning. In those breathing spaces between duties, most concubines learn to live with fear the same way you learn to live with a drafty window. Do you notice it? Do you accept it? You stop complaining. Let's drift now towards something surprisingly empowering. Coping mechanisms. These small, sacred rituals of staying sane. Because yes, concubines developed coping strategies. Some were emotional, some were creative, some were quietly rebellious. Here are a few of their common anchors. 1. Writing poetry short. Elegant poems became containers for their feelings. Tiny diaries, the world mistook for hobbies. 2. Calligraphy. Copying characters over and over was a kind of meditation, a way to steady shaking thoughts. 3. Secret conversations, soft voice, soft room, trusted friend. A pressure valve in human form. 4. Quiet humor, a shared smirk at a pompous official. A whispered joke about another concubine's absurdly elaborate hairstyle. Simple, human relief. 5. The guarded nature doesn't care about politics, and that alone was healing. 6. And sleep. When you're physically exhausted, your worries soften. A surprisingly universal human truth. Let's drift toward the one thing people always wonder about. Romance, rare, unexpected, and not guaranteed. Here's the gentle truth. Most concubines did not love the Lord, and most lords did not love their concubines. Respect, sometimes. Affection, occasionally. Mild interest, often. Indifference. More often than anyone admits, a concubine might see the Lord once a week, or once a month. Sometimes even less. Romance bloomed sometimes. Yes, but it bloomed like a wildflower, unexpected, fragile, always at risk of being stepped on by politics. Love wasn't her job. Harmony was. Let's drift into the one area where she could express individuality, personal identity, hidden under layers of silk. A concubine didn't have the luxury of showing her full personality, so she stashed it away like a secret treasure. It lived in her writing, her music, her small preferences. Tea, slightly stronger. Incense, slightly softer. Her friendships, her reactions to weather, flowers, cats. Poetry, her memories of home, her private humor, her secret disappointments and secret joys. Identity didn't disappear. It just lived quietly, like a candle shielded by cupped hands. Let's drift towards something many concubines learn to master. Observation, her quiet superpower. When you can't speak freely, you learn to watch. Concubines became experts at reading tones, studying posture, understanding hierarchy, identifying people's intentions before they spoke, anticipating mood shifts, detecting trouble long before it arrived. Observation was survival, and mastery of observation often led to subtle influence. A concubine who knew when to speak and, more importantly, when not to, could make her life dramatically easier. Let's drift one last step into this emotional world. Small rebellions, quiet acts of selfhood. Concubines weren't allowed dramatic rebellion. No shouting, no running away dramatically in the rain, no flipping tables or denouncing rivals in poetic monologues. But they had tiny rebellions, the kind that lived at the edge of attention. 1. Reading books they weren't supposed to have. Just small poetry collections, nothing too scandalous. 2. Taking an extra moment in the garden, just long enough to feel the breeze. 3. Wearing a slightly unconventional hairpin. It looked innocent. It wasn't. 4. Writing poems that were almost too honest. 5. Laughing just a fraction too loudly during private hours. 6. Crying softly when no one was listening. These weren't big rebellions, but they were rebellions of the soul, and they kept her alive inside. We've spent a long quiet while exploring the private world inside a lord's residence. Now, let's drift outward beyond the tatami halls, beyond the sliding doors, out into the towns and villages where ordinary people lived, gossiped, and occasionally wondered what it must be like to serve in such lofty, complicated spaces. Because a concubine did not exist only within the household. She existed within society, and society had opinions. Let's glide gently into that. Social status high-low, and strangely in between, a concubine's position in society was spectacularly contradictory. She was haranken, but not noble, respected, but not admired, influential, but not officially powerful, privileged, but not secure if you were mapping the social ladder. She'd be somewhere around, important enough that you should bow slightly, but not so important that you should remember her birthday. Ordinary people tended to think of concubines as lucky, pampered, tragic, intimidating, glamorous, slightly sad, maybe all of the above, depending on the storyteller's mood, which, honestly, was not inaccurate. Let's drift into the legal side. Legal status. The most important person who wasn't actually written down anywhere, legally speaking. Concubines occupied a creatively ambiguous space. They weren't wives. They weren't servants. They weren't courtesans. They weren't property. They weren't independent. They were, instead, affiliated women maintained under the Lord's protection, meaning they belonged to the household structure, but not to any specific category. This ambiguity was incredibly convenient for everyone except the concubine. It allowed the Lord to grant her status when it was useful, the household to restrict her freedom when necessary, society to look down or up at her depending on the scandal of the week. Let's drift over to how people saw her outside the estate. Public perception, admiration, envy, suspicion, and a dash of sympathy when ordinary townspeople caught wind of a lord's concubine strolling with a tent. They felt a complicated cocktail of emotions. Admiration, because she was clearly important. Envy, because she wore expensive silk that an entire village couldn't afford collectively. Curiosity, because they wondered what she actually did all day and usually guessed incorrectly. Suspicion, because powerful women always generated rumors. Pity, because even the common folk understood that a gilded cage is still a cage. A concubine was simultaneously a symbol of luxury and a symbol of restriction. The public didn't always know which side to focus on. Let's drift to the more practical side. Wealth, rich in concept, poor in autonomy. Concubines wore silk. They lived in elegant rooms. They had attendants. They ate good food. They received gifts. All of this created the illusion of wealth, but personal wealth, that was another story. Concubines typically did not control significant amounts of money. They couldn't purchase property. They couldn't own land. They couldn't invest. And they rarely had spending freedom beyond small personal items like combs or hair oil. The luxurious things around them belonged to the household, not to them. Think of it like swimming in a lake of gold, but you're not allowed to keep any in your pockets. Let's drift into another contrast. Public identity versus private identity. Two different lives, two different selves in public or in front of household audiences. A concubine embodied that. She was serene, soft-spoken, poised, beautifully dressed, masked by etiquette every inch. The refined lady she was trained to be, but privately, her identity was more layered. She might have been shy, bold, sarcastic, frightened, intelligent, silly, melancholic, bored, lonely, content, nostalgic. Her public face was a political artifact. Her private self was a quiet accumulation of memories, hopes, worries, and small joys. People saw the silks, they never saw the weight it carried. Let's drift into how she interacted with the outside world. Travel, rare, supervised, and extremely controlled. Concubines did not travel freely. If she left the estate, it meant a formal outing, a shrine visit, a ceremonial appearance, a family-related event, or occasionally accompanying the Lord, but she didn't stroll through markets or wander town streets. When she traveled, attendants surrounded her, guards accompanied her, citizens bowed as she passed. Her presence created quiet ripples of attention. The entire experience was less adventure and more security exercise. Let's drift to something gentler. Gifts, honors, and the occasional symbolic gesture. Concubines occasionally received combs, fans, silk hair cords, poems written by the Lord, incense sets, special seasonal garments, or small pieces of jewelry. These gifts were symbolic, not financial. They marked moments: a festival, an anniversary, a pregnancy, a promotion in household rank, or simply the Lord's fleeting satisfaction receiving a gift could elevate her status for a week, oro, foro, agir, or for exactly as long as people decided to talk about it. But gifts also came with scrutiny, as in, that hairpin seems expensive. Must be the Lord's favorite this month, which was flattering, nerve-wracking, and politically hazardous all at once. Let us drift into a part of concubine life that shaped literally everything and yet was rarely spoken aloud. Rumors. The unofficial currency of social ranking. Rumors, with a bloodstream of elite households. A concubine's reputation could be shaped by a careless comment, a jealous rival, a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding, or just someone being bored enough to invent a story. Negative rumors could isolate her, damage her standing, influenced how the official wife treated her, affect whether the Lord summoned her, determine her long-term security. Positive rumors could nudge her upward, but only slightly, and always temporarily. Rumors were like weather, difficult to control, easy to suffer through. Let's drift into how all this shaped her long-term prospects. Long-term security, stability, uncertainty, and everything in between. Some concubines lived long, peaceful lives in the household. They became respected elder ladies. They mentored younger women. They watched generations come and go. Others had less stable paths, losing favor and being quietly sidelined, returning to their family after conflict, being moved to a separate residence, stepping into religious life later on, or simply fading into the household background. There were no guarantees, only probabilities. And a concubine lived with that knowledge every single day. Let's end this part with a soft truth. The world saw her as symbol, but she lived as a person to the public. A concubine was an ornament, a status symbol, a political gesture, an emblem of refinement, but behind the silk, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman with dreams, a woman with disappointments, a human being navigating a world that controlled every detail of her existence. Her life was beautiful in form, restrictive in substance, quiet in emotion, and far more complex than myths suggest.